When you're hunting for a monitor that actually makes a difference on set, the cheap plug-and-play units that promise bright screens often end up feeling like a false promise, blurry in the sun, laggy when you need focus, and somehow always missing that extra confidence you need when you're pulling that perfect shot. I've been there, watching footage on a handheld LCD that looked great in the studio and then turning the camera around in daylight only to see a washed-out mess that left me guessing whether the focus was right. The question I keep hearing from folks on forums is simple: is there a monitor that actually lets me trust what I see, without breaking the bank or adding a ton of weight? That's why I spent a few days testing the SmallHD Indy 7 on my own rig, comparing it to the low-cost alternatives that usually end up on a buyer's first-page search. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Indy 7 feels like a deliberate answer to that buyer hesitation. It's not a glossy marketing gimmick, it's an on-camera monitor built for creators who want to see what the sensor sees, even under harsh daylight. The 7-inch LCD is bright enough to fight the sun, and the touchscreen response is snappy enough that you can swipe through menus without feeling like you're fighting a sluggish UI. For anyone who's ever missed a focus pull because the monitor was too dim, this is a noticeable upgrade over the $100-ish units that rely on backlights that fade the moment you step outside. The first real-world test I threw at it was a typical outdoor interview setup: a DSLR on a gimbal, a handheld mic, and the Indy 7 bolted right on top of the camera. I was moving between shade and direct sun, and the monitor's daylight visibility held up. The image stayed crisp, and the colors didn't shift, which meant I could keep my eye on exposure and focus without constantly glancing at the camera's built-in screen. That alone saved me a few takes, because I didn't have to pause to read the viewfinder through a visor. If you're a beginner who's just learning how to nail focus, the Indy 7 can be a confidence booster. The touch interface lets you tap to set focus points, and the optional cinema camera control integration means you can adjust iris and gain without reaching for the camera's buttons. I paired it with a Sony a7 III using the 3G SDI output, and the control overlay was intuitive, no digging through menus on the camera body. That's a real time saver when you're trying to keep the shot steady on a tripod while adjusting settings on the fly. However, the monitor isn't a universal fix. If you're shooting primarily in low-light environments, the Indy 7 does a decent job, but it isn't a night vision miracle. The brightness can be dialed up, but you'll still notice a bit of grain when you push it beyond the camera's native exposure. For a low-budget indie filmmaker who lives in dim warehouses, you might still need an external light or a larger monitor with higher peak brightness to feel truly comfortable. In those scenarios, the Indy 7 is a step up from cheap alternatives, but you shouldn't expect it to replace a dedicated on-set lighting plan. Battery life is another practical point that often trips people up. The monitor draws power from the camera's 12V output, and in my tests, it ran for about 3 hours on a fully charged battery pack before the voltage started to dip. That's fine for a half-day shoot, but if you're planning an all-day run with a DSLR that already struggles with power, you'll want a separate power source or a larger mount battery. The good news is the monitor's ultra-thin and lightweight design means it doesn't add much strain to the rig, so adding a small battery plate won't throw your balance off. One of the strengths that often gets overlooked in generic reviews is how the Indy 7 meshes with existing lens ecosystems. I used it with a set of 2470mm f/2.8 lenses on a Canon EOS R5, and the focus peaking overlay was accurate enough that I could trust the visual cue even when shooting at the maximum aperture. That confidence is something you rarely get from a cheap monitor that either has no peaking or a laggy overlay. The same held true when I switched to a fast 50mm prime on a Panasonic GH5. The monitor's color profile stayed consistent, which helped me keep my exposure consistent across different camera bodies without having to recalibrate every time. Now, who should actually buy the SmallHD Indy 7? If you're a hobbyist who shoots a lot outdoors, travel vlogs, nature walks, or street interviews, you'll appreciate the daylight readability and the touch controls that let you stay focused on the subject rather than fiddling with buttons. Working creators who already have a decent power setup and need a reliable on-camera monitor for quick confidence checks will also find value here, especially because the monitor's professional software toolset gives you the ability to